This book began during a brief stint at a Presbyterian seminary in St. Louis. There I encountered a book, Biblical Theology by Gerardus Voss. What impressed me was not so much the book itself as the idea of the book. Voss intended to present theology as it arises chronologically from the Bible. His intent, if I remember correctly, was to show how the unity of the Scripture produces a coherent understanding of God as it unfolds over the whole history of Israel and Israel's Messiah. The book itself was an academic and scholarly book, one that was not particularly accessible to laymen. It occurred to me then that the same project could be carried out in a more user-friendly way. So began the first of 5 attempts at an adult Sunday school class. The goal was to read and discuss the whole Bible over the course of a year and to rearrange the text in a chronological way with the prophets in the right places and the Psalms inserted where they belonged and the 2 Chronicles and the 2 Kings shuffled together, and so on. I called it Bible Overview. The first year I did the course, my notes consisted in a rather sparse outline, but each time I attempted the course, I could not resist elaborating on the notes, correcting them, pointing out interesting passages and ideas. Although the class was only actually completed that first time, the notes continued to grow until it was brought to my attention that I had in fact written a book. This is not that book. When it first occurred to me that it might be worthwhile making the notes into a coherent book, and I began to work toward that goal, everything expanded yet again. What we have here is what the meager outline of Genesis grew into, and the rest of the outline is gradually assuming the forms of what appears to be a series of Bible commentaries. But this is not exactly a Bible commentary, at least not like the Bible commentaries I've seen. It is, first of all, not a scholarly production because I am not a biblical scholar. My professional training is in mathematics, and my understanding of the Bible has grown out of personal meditation and study over the decades. The book is not scholarly. My intent was to aim it at ordinary people, and I hope I've succeeded in doing so. But it was not my intent to write as simple a book as I could. I wanted to write a book in which the reader could watch another layman wrestling with the complex issues of theology and trying to answer the hard questions that any serious student of the Bible should inevitably encounter. It is a book for someone who wants to not set aside difficulties, even if there are no satisfying answers, and who wants to think about the Bible as hard as he or she can. The modern age values the professional opinion, and it's right that we do so. But like all purely human values, professionalism can be a handicap as well as an aid. Do we really think that in order to contribute to a dialogue about the Bible, one must be an academic? Do we mean to restrict discussion about the Bible to the scholars and have the rest of us wait in the wings until they've reached their conclusions? Are scholars always trusted to speak the truth so that the layman should sit back and wait on their verdict? I have a very high opinion of the value of academic research, but the scholars are in a state of disarray these days, and there seems to be room for some outside influence. I wrote this book because I thought I might have something to add. There are other warnings I owe you before you begin to read. Where am I coming from? What are my presuppositions? Do I have axes to grind? Do I have intellectual or moral biases? The easiest way to try to answer these questions is to give you something of a biographical sketch, to give you my testimony. I have a rather patchwork denominational background. I was raised in the American South as a Southern Baptist, baptized at the age of 11 in Pelhatachi, Mississippi. Growing up in the South during the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s eventually convinced me that Christianity was the source of all evil, and by the time I graduated high school, I was mostly interested in what is now called New Age ideas. But at college in California, my interests were altered when I attended a congregational church out of curiosity. I'd never heard of congregational churches and was unprepared. Actually, the church service itself was of no consequence. I do not have any memory of what was said or done. I merely felt the confrontation of a person whom I intuitively knew to be Jesus, who silently demanded my allegiance. He was an emotionally tangible, almost physical presence. At that point, I realized that whatever the failings of Christianity might or might not be, they were irrelevant, and however much I might personally dislike or despise Christianity or its history or its people, that also was irrelevant. It was on Jesus himself that everything hinged. It was Jesus himself and not the church to whom I owed a response. My college years were spent with that Congregational church, a couple of Presbyterian churches, and the InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. It was the time of the Jesus People movement and the Charismatic movement. I, like so many students, met with charismatic people who prayed for me to receive the gift of tongues. I didn't get the baptism of Spirit at that time. What I did get came months later, perhaps the following year. I woke up one morning simply filled with joy. It is nothing I can adequately describe. There was no emotional room in me for anything but joy. I was ecstatic, though without the tongues or prophesying or whatever. I can't remember how long this lasted, several days I think, probably not more than a week, and then I woke up and it was gone, just vanished with only a memory. Naturally, I thought I'd done something wrong and I spent a long time praying. I recall fasting for several days. The answer I got to my inquiry was very simple. You are called to live by faith, not by sight. The sort of spiritual delight I had been allowed to experience made it all too easy. But the easy way is not the way we, or at least I, have been called to live. Thus, my college years made me a Christian and something of a charismatic. I was convinced that the gifts of the Spirit all were real and present, but that they were not intended to make the Christian life groovy, like a sort of spiritual hippiedom. After college, I went to St. Louis, Missouri for graduate school and became involved in a Presbyterian church, connected to the ministry of Francis Schaeffer and L'Abri Fellowship. The pastor was Egon Middleman, for whom I had great admiration and who taught me a great deal. In that church, I learned some real theology. I got a respect for church history and for John Calvin and Martin Luther and Augustine and many others that I still have. And I met my wife Catherine, who had come to that church from a Catholic background. We were involved with a Presbyterian church for 13 years and helped to establish a mission church where I became the ruling elder for 4 years. I was a seminary student for a year or so at Covenant Seminary, and then a seminary dropout as I realized that I couldn't fit peacefully long-term in that denomination. For several years, Catherine and I had both felt called to move to a rural setting, and in 1986 we did so. This is a long story in itself and ended up in upstate New York with 6 children. We bought a small farm from an Amish man and soon joined a non-denominational charismatic congregation. We were members of the church for about 13 or 14 years, and I was also an elder there for 4 years until doctrinal issues made it impossible to stay. During that time, we became acquainted with some Amish families and developed a permanent admiration for them as well. In 2002, we joined the parish of Trinity Episcopal Church, where we were very happy. The liturgical style is still something of a stretch for me, but I increasingly appreciate its value. In the Episcopal Church, we have felt home church-wise for the first time. We have a total of 10 children, the last being born in 1998. When our children were older, my wife Catherine attended an Episcopal seminary, Nashata House. She was ordained as an Episcopal priest in December 2010 and has been called to be the rector of a small Episcopal church that is near where we live. Still, theologically, I tend to fall in between the cracks. A fundamentalist, liberal, Calvinist, Anabaptist, crypto-Catholic, charismatic. Wherever you may come from in your own background, this book is likely to make you alternately comfortable and uncomfortable, surprised and then perhaps angry. You'll probably not find my approach to Scripture totally alien, but you'll also find elements that challenge what you currently believe. I believe the theological mishmash in my viewpoint is an advantage that nearly anyone can use to their good. In this way, I believe God has prepared me to be an iron that sharpens many other styles of iron. At least, that is my prayer. Other than a denominational hodgepodge, I'm writing from the viewpoint of faith. I assume the Bible is a true revelation, and my default position is to believe what it says. More specifically, it's the true revelation of a person, not a revelation of everything. Even more specifically, it's the true revelation of a person through a series of covenants. The idea of a covenant seems to me a very useful organizational tool for understanding the Bible, and it seems to be one that the author chose as well. Also, my impulse is to organize events chronologically. The chronological organization makes sense to me because I assume the Bible is a progressive revelation. In other words, the Bible is one person introducing himself to other people. In that process, he doesn't tell everything about himself all at once. He gives increasingly intimate glimpses of who he really is as people adjust to what he already said. But there's yet another caution I owe you. I think in outlines, and that is what you will find here. I can't help but write as a mathematician, and that means that sometimes I'll be too organized or too abstract or too theoretical for your taste. Perhaps I'll be too analytical and you'll find it maddening. Perhaps I'll speculate more than you think I should. My style may well drive you crazy. On the other hand, it's by grace that I am what I am. Minimizing who I am and how I think would also hide whatever God might intend to do through me when He made me up. Here then is my take on what the book of Genesis says, and I hope that everyone who reads this will find it irritating, offensive, challenging, interesting, helpful, and worthwhile. What good is it to read something you already agree with? You learn nothing. It may be safe, but it's also boring and a waste of your time. I pray that what I say will be just irritating enough to get you thinking, but not so irritating that you just go away. The individual sections will be most helpful if you read the Bible passage first, and then the section, and then the Bible again, back and forth. I use the New American Standard and the English Standard versions most often because they tend to be very literal translations, though they are occasionally awkward. I try to arrange the material in bite-sized pieces so that you can read it section by section without too great an expenditure of time. I seldom consult commentaries except about technical details of Hebrew or Greek or history, so all the opinions tend to be my own, and you can just blame me. There are ideas that have become such a fundamental part of my permanent mental furniture that I don't really remember where they came from. If I have inadvertently absconded with anyone else's ideas, I can only apologize in advance and congratulate you on your insights. But the one to whom I owe the most is my wife, Catherine. She's taught me most of what I understand and kept me from being stupid more times than I can remember. I respect her opinions more than anyone else's that I know, and when we have disagreed, she is generally the one who has turned out to be nearer the mark. I cannot give her enough credit for her good influence on me and my thinking. Use this book, use my opinions and thoughts and speculations as far as they are helpful to you, and leave them behind when they are not. The title for this book, Caleb's Eye, A Spy's Journey Through Genesis, was suggested by Catherine. It is, of course, a reference to the spy who, with Joshua, brought back a good report of the Promised Land. This book, and any book that follows, is my report on the book about the Promised Land, as best as I can understand it, as clearly as I can see it, hoping that you and I will be encouraged to go on in and get out of this desert.